Hi, this is a little different than what I normally do on my channel, but this is what I think that I have a true expertise in. So I thought that I would try to help some people out with this. I have a bachelor's degree in music education with an emphasis on voice and also a teaching credential here in California to teach voice and teach high school, college. I do all of those things, and so I thought it would be really helpful to kind of give you a starting lesson and what I do in my first voice lesson if I'm working with people one-on-one. And the very first thing that I like to teach people is just about the anatomy and the structure of how the voice works. I feel like once you understand the anatomy of your voice, then it's easier to manipulate or move things or relax things the way that they should be, to be in a more healthy place vocally. And so I want to start by just kind of talking through some of the most important parts of the anatomy of the voice. So I kind of want to start from our head down to our toes and work that way. The very first thing that I would like to talk about is our resonance or our resonators. A lot of people talk about having more resonance, and that's kind of that more warm sound. And that basically means that you kind of want to open up space in the back of your head, in the back of your throat. So what makes each one of our voices unique is that we have a different shape going on inside of our nasal cavity or inside of our throat. Everybody has a unique space going on and a unique set of vocal cords, and that's what makes each one of us a little bit more unique than the other, and that's why it's really, really hard to kind of manipulate and be exactly like somebody else. There are ways to kind of move those resonators to be more similar to other singers. Not always a healthy thing to do, but that space in the back of the throat, kind of like when we yawn. When you yawn, you lift your soft palate. If you feel the roof of your mouth, you have a hard bump on the roof of your mouth. Right behind that is the soft palate. That soft palate can be manipulated up and down. So usually when somebody asks you to give more resonance, you kind of want to lift that space. That's where we can kind of manipulate that sound a little bit and kind of create more of an open, warm tone, is raise that soft palate. When you raise that soft palate, it blocks off the air flowing into the nasal cavity, and so you'll get less of a nasally tone. So if something that you struggle with is kind of a nasally quality, you want to lift up that soft palate resonator to stop the sound from kind of shaking up in the head a little bit more. But sound, as it vibrates, is going to vibrate through that space and all the way through the nasal cavity, and that's what makes each one of us unique. The second part of the anatomy that I want to talk about is our voice box. Our voice box sits right here. It's also called the larynx. And right there within our voice box is our vocal cords. And our vocal cords sit inside there like this way, but they do this to create sound. That's called the Bernoulli effect. They do this to create sound, but really, really quickly. The longer they stretch, the higher they get. The shorter they go, the lower they get. Now, vocal cords are only going to be as thick as they are naturally. Unfortunately, vocal cords will get thicker as you get older, or if you smoke or do harmful things to your vocal cords, they'll start to develop scar tissue and thicken up that way, which will make it harder to reach those higher notes. But those higher notes, the flexibility of our vocal cords, there is flexibility in the length of our vocal cords. So you can kind of pull those vocal cords longer to kind of develop a higher range or work your higher range a little bit more. So those vocal cords that are sitting here in the voice box or the larynx or pharynx, those vocal cords can be kind of manipulated or obstructed by how we're using this voice box. So the voice box sits in our neck right here and goes up and down. If you swallow, you can feel that kind of move up and down. If you yawn, it'll drop and raise. We need to kind of keep those vocal cords and that voice box in a sort of neutral position for the most part. And here's why. When the voice box drops down, what happens is there's all this flesh that's sitting around this bone. And so the flesh that's sitting around there kind of has nowhere to go except in toward the vocal cords, which sit right there doing their Bernoulli effect on the top of that voice box. That flesh can push those vocal cords so hard toward each other that you might get something called a glottal sound, or you may just have no sound coming out at all, or maybe even like a gurgling sound, or just some pain when we're trying to sing. So it's really important that we kind of move that vocal cord voice box up toward the center. So kind of be aware of where that vocal cord or that voice box is sitting as you sing. The other position that the vocal voice box or larynx can be in that is really not necessarily that healthy is really high. And once that voice box goes really, really high, what happens is now that flesh that's all around that bone has to kind of pull down. And what that does is kind of pull the vocal cords apart. And the vocal cords have a really hard time pulling together to create the pitch that you want it to. So you'll get an airy sound. Sometimes you'll get like a whiny, like kind of like pinched sound. That air and the vocal cords are thinning out so much to try to get to each other that it's not really a beautiful sound either. So we want to try to really work on manipulating that voice box, not necessarily manipulating it because we're manipulating it, dropping it, and raising it. Is we want to keep it in a neutral kind of speaking position. I will say that most Americans speak with their voice box sort of dropped, and it's sort of unhealthy. If you kind of think more of like a Disney princess or like a little bit of a higher pitch, your voice box moves up and a little bit more forward, and that's actually a healthier place to speak, but it's just not what we do here in America. And so we kind of speak in an unhealthy position as it is. So really try to think about that as you're working that voice box and moving that up and down, and try to kind of play with manipulating it so you learn how to control that on your own. The next thing that I want to talk about is your tongue. Your tongue is a really strong muscle, and it can force a lot of tension into the neck and all around here in the jawline. And so a little technique that is one of my favorite techniques to try is find your jawbone here, and right in between your jawbone where it's soft, if you push up and then swallow, you'll feel that tongue push back at you and push back at your thumb. If you're feeling that pushback when you're singing, there's some unnecessary tension happening there. So that's something to be really aware of. Sometimes when we're creating consonants, you'll have that pushback, and that's not as harmful. But if you're open on a vowel singing and you're having that tension and that pushback, it's really, really unhealthy and an unhealthy position to be in. And there's some tightness that's happening all around here because of the tongue. So that's something to be very aware of. And then the last, but certainly not least, thing that I want to talk about in regards to vocal anatomy is our diaphragm. You'll hear a lot of people talk about breathe into the diaphragm, things like that. What the heck does that mean? Well, the diaphragm sits right here below your lungs. The diaphragm is a really strong muscle that is in charge of getting air in and out of our lungs. Our lungs have no muscles of their own. The muscles that are around our rib cage, if we're lifting and holding ourselves up with good posture as it is, I struggle with that. I have horrible posture, and I have to remind myself all the time to sit up tall. So if we're already lifting and kind of expanding our rib cage, giving a little bit of space in the armpits, and then controlling our diaphragm, we should be getting ourselves a lot of nice breath. So when we breathe in, that diaphragm comes down like this, and it pushes down on all the guts that are underneath it. Which is why people say breathe into your stomach. You know, they're not actually asking you to breathe into your stomach, but they're asking you to kind of use that diaphragm to push down and out so you leave space for the lungs. So if your diaphragm is like this and you're not pushing very hard down and out, then your lungs aren't gonna have a place to go. So that's really, really important to be aware of, is we need to really work that diaphragm. And again, it's a muscle, so we can control that and make it stronger and make it more flexible. So that diaphragm there, ways to exercise it is by just practicing breath control, taking deep breaths and then singing a long note, and that diaphragm will when you breathe in, and then as you sing out, it will slowly move itself back into the relaxed position. The better you get at that, the more slow that diaphragm can go, the more controlled that diaphragm can be. So if you're feeling like you've got a really breathy tone, it may be that you don't have really good control of your diaphragm, and that diaphragm is moving up too quickly and releasing a lot of air. So that's something to be aware of. One way that I really like to make myself aware of the diaphragm muscle is I call it it's a muscle that we use, I know, horrible, but it is the muscle that we use to poop. And so if you're thinking about taking a breath in and you've already got everything lifted here, you should get a lot of expansion all around here, and you should be feeling kind of like you're pushing down. So if you're feeling like you can't support a tone very well, think about kind of pushing down and out like you're trying to poop a little bit, and that might help support the air and support the tone and control the steadiness of that tone. So I hope this helps. I hope that it maybe helps you be more aware of what's going on inside you as you learn to sing. If you have questions for me, or if you enjoy this video, please comment below, please like and subscribe. I will have more for you in the future, and I thank you for watching. Bye.